I am titling the next two-part section, The Children's Village. Of the 10 concentration camps that were established during World War II, Manzanar was the only orphanage. The children's village at Manzanar was the only orphanage housing 101 children. Our keynote speaker this afternoon is Dr. Cathy Irwin. She's an associate professor of English at the University of Laverne, and she's the author of the book Twice Orphaned, Voices from the Children's Village at Manzanar. In her book, which I'm sure she'll mention and talk about a bit, she explores individuals who were interned without families, exploring their feelings, their everyday lives, their experiences. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Cathy Irwin as our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Craig. I'd first like to thank the Manzanar Committee and the staff at the Manzanar National Historical Site for inviting me to be the keynote speaker at this 47th Annual Manzanar Pilgrimage. I thank Superintendent Bernadette Johnson and the staff at Manzanar, especially the interpretive staff, Elisa Lynch, and the historian Maggie Wittenberg at the bookstore. I am particularly indebted for this high honor to the chairs of the Manzanar Committee, Bruce Kunotomi Embre and Carrie Kunotomo Kababa. We are indebted to Bruce's mother and Carrie's aunt, the late Sue Kunotomi Embre, a founding member of the Manzanar Committee, the force and spirit behind the Manzanar Pilgrimage. I never got to meet Sue Kunotomi Embre, but I've heard stories about her from my dear friend and colleague, Art Hansen. It was Art Hansen, Sue Embre, and Wilbur Sato who led a group of graduate students from Cal State Fullerton on a class field trip to Manzanar in 1993. And like many of us today, they traveled the 240 or so miles from Los Angeles to come here today to bear witness to the environment and space of internment that many Japanese Americans had to endure for 3 or more long years. One of the graduate students on this 1993 trip, Lisa Noble, became deeply interested in the west portion of Manzanar known as the Children's Village, an area Sue Embre and Wilbur Sato mentioned to her was an orphanage, and as Craig mentioned, was the only orphanage among the 10 War Relocation Authority detention camps. 3 barracks specifically for approximately 101 orphaned children of Japanese descent, including children of mixed-race heritage. It was during this field trip to Manzanar that Lisa Nobe, as well as grad students like Noemi Romero, Celeste Cardenas, and Reiko Katabami, became interested in these children who survived Manzanar and had been orphaned first by their families and then by their government. These graduate students, like myself, 12 years later, would interview many of the survivors who had lived at this orphanage. Through our studies, we learned that the average age of the 10,000 internees at Manzanar was only 17 and a half years old, and the average age of children at Children's Village was 8 years old. These children were incarcerated at Manzanar for the same reason that 110,000 other American citizens and residents who lived on the coast of California, Oregon, and Washington were, because they were considered a threat to national security. President FDR's Executive Order 9066 subjected them to military exclusion and detention carried out as a direct result of prejudice and discrimination. This denial of persons' rights included these little children. So many of you are probably thinking the same thing I was when I heard this. How can 8-year-olds be a threat to national security? So we are here today to reflect on this incarceration of so many families, so many children. And for the sake of all children, we come together today to never forget the impact of war, racism, and incarceration has on both the young and the old. For many years, I studied the orphanage euphemistically called Children's Village that was located behind the barbed wire at Manzanar. For most Japanese American families, life in a concentration camp disrupted family unity because of the breakdown of family routines. Instead of eating together at traditional meal times or spending time in the home, children spent more time with their peers. Parents and children had to eat in community mess halls, and children spent more time outdoors with their peers because of overcrowded barracks. For the 101 orphans living in the children's village, they may have experienced camp life a little differently than those children with their families because they had already experienced the breakdown of their own families before the war, primarily as a result of the illness or death of one or both parents or financial crisis. The majority of Nisei orphans sent to live at Manzanar had already experienced institutional life at one of the 3 different orphanages or children's homes in Los Angeles and San Francisco, specifically for children of Japanese descent. At the same time, there are also heartbreaking stories of some of the children who became orphans as a direct result of Executive Order 9066 and internment. For many families, the stress and trauma of being sent to an American concentration camp tore apart their families as parents were driven to extreme actions and choices. 2 young girls at Manzanar were placed in the children's village after their parents committed suicide in their barrack. In another family, one mother in poor health suffered a nervous breakdown after her husband was arrested by the FBI and sent to a detention center. Placed in a county hospital, her 5 children were sent to one of the children's homes and then to Children's Village at Manzanar. In another case, the reason for placement was kept secret. A baby born at Santa Anita Assembly Center was separated from his Mexican-American mother and Japanese-American father and sent to the Children's Village. He never found out why he had been orphaned during the war. Today, on this pilgrimage, we all have a chance to reflect on these stories and experiences of children. At the same time, we are also here today to remember those who took care of children, including those who cared for children who had no mother or father. I would like to honor today Lillian and Harry Matsumoto, who cared for the orphan children at Manzanar as the superintendent and assistant superintendent of Children's Village. Before the war, Lillian and Harry had been working at the Shonin, one of the orphanages or children's homes for children of Japanese ancestry. When the Shonin director, Rokuichi Joy Kusumoto, was arrested by the FBI and sent to Missoula, Montana Detention Center, the Matsumotos were suddenly in charge of over 30 children and a staff of young, mostly unmarried Nisei women in their 20s. When she started working at the Shonin in Los Angeles in 1935, Lillian Matsumoto herself was 22 years old, a recent UC Berkeley College graduate. 7 years later, at the beginning of World War II, as businesses run by Issei were shut down, and bank accounts and other assets of Issei and Nisei families were frozen, it was Lillian who had to find money to maintain the Shonin orphanage and keep all these children safe and fed. It was Lillian who had to decide with the board members of the Shonin how to keep the staff caregivers and the children together so as not to traumatize the children even further by placing them with unknown institutional staff of the state. They, along with board member chairman T.G. Ishimura, wrote letters to the California State Department of Welfare, pleading on behalf of the Shonin staff for exemption from relocation and detainment. In one letter, they wrote, "The staff is father and mother to these children. Love, understanding, and guidance are just as essential as food and shelter. Any change in the present staff will unnecessarily bring undue hardships to these children. The staff members are more than just parents. Their responsibility is greater in human relationships." Receiving only temporary exemption, it was the Matsumotos and their staff who drove from Los Angeles to Manzanar in June 1942 with a bus full of orphan children to 3 tar paper barracks, otherwise known as the Children's Village, to continue their care of children, even under the dire conditions at Manzanar. Between 1942 and 1945, they and their staff took care of children sent to this children's village from foster homes and broken homes, children from hospitals and maternity homes, children of Mexican Japanese, Indian Japanese, Filipino Japanese, and Italian, Irish, and French descent. Lillian and Harry Matsumoto and their staff cared for all these children. Today we are honored to have with us the daughter of Lillian and Harry Matsumoto, Carol Matsumoto. Like her parents, Carol Matsumoto is also a leader in the community. She is currently serving as a council member of the City Council of South San Francisco and has served on this council since 1997. She has been mayor of this city 4 times in 2000, 2004, 2009, and 2014. I know Carol is here somewhere. She's right there. If you can stand, Carol, if you want. But we thank you, Carol, and your family for all your decades of care and continual service to the community. In 1972, as the Vietnam War slowly came to an end, Sue Embrey and the Manzanar Committee were seeing connections between Manzanar and current events in the United States and other parts of the world. At the 1973 Manzanar Pilgrimage, Sue Embrey stated, "Manzanar is a symbol. It symbolizes the ultimate negation of American democracy, and that is the racism that's been in the United States. Even today, while we are at the pilgrimage, it's going on in Vietnam with the strategic hamlets and Asians killing Asians because there are Asian Americans being drafted to fight in Vietnam. You who are spending the day here at Manzanar for this pilgrimage should keep it in your minds that it can happen to someone else. And I hope that you will be at the forefront of defending people so that it doesn't happen to them." Those were Sue Kunitomi Embrey's words in 1973. Today, for the sake of all children everywhere, we have taken time to go on a pilgrimage that compels participants to remember the harsh injustices that the Japanese American community endured, and to remind ourselves that even after redress, our work is not yet complete. In the 21st century, Muslim and Arab children have also had to face detainment and law enforcement, the fear of an unknown future, the loss of friends and property, and the painful, confusing questions of identity as a result of racism and discrimination in the U.S. After 9/11, Arab and Muslim American rights were slowly eroded. According to Mustafa Boyoumi, the U.S. government began preventative detention of at least 5,000 men, women, and entire families, almost exclusively because of birthplace. After 9/11, the U.S. government instituted a program called Special Registration, which required the interviewing, fingerprinting, and photographing of more than 170,000 men from 24 Muslim-majority countries and North Korea. And so it continues. For the sake of our children, we are all here on this journey in the year 2016, the year of this 47th Annual Manzanar Pilgrimage. Let us continue to confront the social iniquities and injustices occurring today in America. May this pilgrimage be a journey of change and transformation for you, of deeper understanding and healing. For the sake of all children, may we share stories, the stories of our lives that connect us. May we care and carry these memories of those who came before us and those who we meet today. May we defend the human rights of all people so that it doesn't happen again.